Good afternoon and welcome to the continuing RBH webinar series. We're glad you could make it and spend your afternoon with us. Today we have a great topic, the road to better management, and our speaker today is Marcy Stafford. Marcy has been a clinical manager here at RBH for about 4 years, and before that she was with the United Health Group and doing a clinical manager job over there. She's got a lot of experience consulting with supervisors over the years, and I think it's great that we have her expertise with us today. And I hope you really enjoy some of this great information she's going to help us with. So with that, I'll turn it over to you, Marcy.
Thank you, Russ. All right. My name is Marcy, and I am here with Joseph and Brenda to do this webinar for you. Thank you all for attending. And I will be talking about management for the next hour or so. We'll take questions at the end, but during the webinar, you can type in your questions as we go in the chat box, and I'll be able to address those at the end of our talk. That's my dog, Finbar. And I just wanted to start by saying that managing people is a tough job. It can be rewarding, but to do it well, it takes time and a lot of work. As a manager, sometimes you just don't know what to do or where to turn for help. And like this guy, it can seem like you're out there all alone. And yet, you're on a leash. My goal for this session is to make your job a little easier. We'll be talking about the role and responsibilities of a supervisor, the steps to an effective performance management process. What is performance management? We'll be going through that in quite detail. What to avoid, and how the EAP can be a resource for you as an employer. But first, I'd like to learn a little bit about you, who's on the webinar call today. So the first polling question we have is your primary role in your organization. Are you human resources? Are you a supervisor? Are you a manager who supervises other supervisors? Or do you not supervise staff? We'll give you some time to fill that out.
Like it's a pretty close split. It's about a third of each HR, supervisors, and managers.
Okay, great. All right. The next poll is to get some information about your years of experience. This webinar is about management, so if you could just indicate if you've had less than a year of experience supervising other people, 1 to 5, 5 to 15 years, more than 15, or again, if you don't supervise people in your role.
And for this question, looks like about a quarter said 1 to 5, a quarter said 1 to 15, and about a third said 5 to 15.
5 to 15, yeah.
The biggest distribution there.
Great. So lots of experience on the call. Much of this might be a review for many of you. For myself, my first job as a supervisor was about 13 years ago, and I actually worked with Russ. We were at the same organization, supervisors together. And for the last 7 years, I've been doing management consulting full-time for EAPs. And what that means is that I get to talk to all of you, human resources, managers and supervisors, about people issues that come up in your day-to-day work. So we'd like to share that experience with you today. Some of the problems that we see as consultants and as managers. Interpersonal conflicts are pretty common. Employees that just don't get along with each other and can't seem to behave civilly and professionally when they need to communicate with each other at work. Absenteeism and presenteeism, people that don't show up at work who should be there, and people that do show up that shouldn't be there. Lots of things can cause the decrease in productivity that we see and that you call us about. Drug and alcohol issues can actually be occurring at work sometimes. People can be using on the job, even selling drugs on the job. And unprofessional conduct is a catchphrase that covers a lot of things. I think in doing this job for a number of years, I've heard probably everything, and you don't have to have it specified in your policy manual to address it. It can be called unprofessional conduct because usually it is. The causes of performance problems. Sometimes we get sidetracked trying to figure this out. So sometimes it's just the employee does not understand what's expected of them in terms of their job description. And you can make an influence. You can have an influence in that. You can certainly work with them to make sure they understand. In fact, that is one of your responsibilities as their supervisor. Issues at home can affect work for obvious reasons. Sometimes employees' relationship with their manager is the cause of performance problems. If you have a manager that you don't feel you can trust, who is overly critical of you, belittles you, yells at you, throws things at you, undermines you, it's going to show up in your performance at work. Sometimes it's inadequate training. Often with new hires, we have them trained by other people who are in that role, and maybe they're not the best trainers that we could use, but that's convenient. And as a result, the employee doesn't have the training that they need to do the job, and it shows up in problems with performance. Sometimes it's just a poor hire. It's a mismatch in terms of we hired someone, we thought they had the skill set for the role, and once they were on the job, we realized, nope, they can't actually do this well, and it's more than a training issue. It's the wrong fit for the job. Sometimes poor performance is actually acceptable in the company culture, and so when you have problems in performance and don't address them over time, it becomes the norm and more acceptable for folks to continue not meeting expectations of the job, behaving unprofessionally, because they see there's no consequence for doing that. It attracts employees who aren't the ones that you want and repels the ones that you do when the company culture does not address poor performance. Substance use and abuse, also, even if it's not happening at work, you have folks that may have addiction issues, they're also in your workplace. And you may not know about this, but it can show up in poor performance. And also, sometimes employees just don't have professional fluency, which means they just don't know what's expected as an employee, things that we take for granted. Showing up on time, showing up dressed appropriate to the role. When your supervisor gives you a task, you're receptive to actually doing it instead of arguing with them. Things that you learn on the job sometimes, or you just know. Sometimes these things can be taught, and other times, if it's an employee who has a pattern of doing this over years and it's part of a culture that they've, again, not had any negative consequences for, it's much more difficult to correct that behavior. So the responsibilities you have as a supervisor truly boils down to this. It's to promote a safe and productive workplace. How you do that? One of the easiest ways and most effective ways is to build relationships with each of your staff. Set clear expectations for success. So not just what you expect, but having a mindset that your employees will be successful in meeting those expectations. addressing performance issues when they occur versus putting that off because it's uncomfortable, and knowing when to consult when you need help, either HR or your EAP. So one of the easiest and most effective ways, as I said, to build relationships with staff is one-on-one meetings. And, you know, unfortunately, a lot of organizations don't do this because they don't prioritize it, and it's time-consuming. It does take a lot of time. So I'd like to just kind of get a sense in your organization, for the folks that do supervise others, how often you have one-on-ones with your individual staff. Once a week, twice a month, once a month, once a quarter, or you don't do one-on-ones.
So about 10% say twice or once a month, and about a third say once a week, and a third say once a quarter, and then a few also say they don't do one-on-ones.
Okay, great. That's great. So I'm going to take some time on this, building the relationship piece. I think with the one-on-ones, it's great for those of you who are prioritizing that, and I think if there's one thing to take away from this, if you could give that a try if you're not doing it, or maybe increase the frequency if you are. But building relationships with staff truly does make your job a lot easier, because it results in things like empathy. You know, I did some work for one organization years ago where the manager began our conversation by listing the employees that reported up to him and their faults. And it wasn't constructive. It was very critical, but also the word I've used to describe it was disdain. So, you know, not surprisingly, he was having difficulty getting the results that he wanted from that team. You really need to be able to get to know your people and be able to put yourself in their shoes, because disdain and respect don't go together. Disdain and empathy don't go together, and you really can't not have empathy for your folks and be effective as a manager. Building relationships also increases trust. If they don't know you, your folks will respond to you as a role. So you're a manager, you wear that hat no matter what, but if you don't also get to know them as people, then they will see you as that role exclusively. They may respond to you as they've responded to past authority figures in their life, make assumptions that aren't correct about your intentions, and it's much better if they know you and know that you have their back, and anything that you're doing, especially when it comes time to having difficult conversations with them about performance, you're doing in their best interest. You already have established that. And it also works for you, because if you know them, you can trust them as well. You know, employees, sometimes managers feel insecure about what their employees may be doing or their intent, and they overmanage, micromanage. If you can trust your folks, you have a lot less work to do. It's much easier on you because you don't need to monitor everything. And if you could imagine, you know, creating relationships with your folks where you trust them to the level that any one of them could, for a week, represent your company on Twitter. Just, you know, put that out there as something to imagine. Building relationships also gives you individual information. So everyone's different in terms of why they're there in that job, why they stay. You know, you want to know that as their manager, because you can use that information for your benefit and theirs. People have different strengths. In a lot of organizations, you may be responsible for supervising many people in the same job function, but not everybody has the same strengths in that job function, and there's parts of the job that they may not be good at. You can play with that. If you have one person that's really good at the writing part and the other person that's good at the speaking part, you can, use that to your advantage. You don't have to focus on everybody doing the same thing. And when people use their strengths, they are generally, of course, happier and more productive. They can get a lot more done when they're able to do what they're strong in. With goals, too, you also may have people at different stages of their careers. You can help a young person who's starting their career in terms of planning. You can also work with people that are at the end of their careers and anything in between. You don't need to necessarily be thinking in terms of what do they want to do, what job do they want to do next at your organization either. But this is about getting to know them and what interests them and what they can accomplish, what they want to accomplish, and then using that information to help them get there. I had one individual that I supervised who was a relatively new employee to our organization, and she was nervous to tell me that she was going to be leaving us, and the reason was she got accepted at divinity school at Yale, which was her dream. So it had nothing to do with our work, but I was so proud, that's cool. And that's the mindset that you can have to get the most out of your work as a manager. Be on their side, be rooting for them, whatever they decide to do. Preferences, too, employees vary in terms of their learning style. Some people need to just get right in there and start doing a job and make mistakes and learn that way. Others are really nervous about that and want a lot of information, materials, training before they start. Respect that, use that. Again, it works well when you know what those preferences are. They also can have preferences for feedback. That's really important because, we think of feedback as motivating no matter what, but people vary in how they want to receive feedback. I had one gentleman who did not like public praise, and so the standard at the organization was, when you hit a target, to recognize that person in an email to the team. The person would get a bonus in terms of money on their check, and that was how it was done. But he did not like to be recognized publicly, so he asked if we could, instead of paying him, we could use the money to have a brunch for the team. And so we did, and that was rewarding to him, whereas an email and money would not have been. You also, of course, can learn the areas to avoid, the things that your people individually don't like, whether it's about their job or about you as a supervisor. The more you're open to having that conversation, the more leverage you have to, meet them where they are and have them be receptive to what you have to say. So, again, if you have an employee who doesn't like to receive a lot of feedback, then you can have a conversation about that, about when and how they want to hear from you when there's something that you need to tell them about. And many organizations, they use the annual review process as an opportunity to improve weaknesses. Everybody has weaknesses. We're adults. I don't find that effective personally, because if you're focusing on your weakness, you aren't a very happy camper, and you're not delivering the performance that probably the organization wants of you. If your weakness is a primary part of your job, you're probably in the wrong role. So rather than, trying to work on weaknesses, you can use that information and just avoid them having to do those tasks. Again, somebody else on the team might have that as a strength, so take advantage of knowing that information. Building relationships too, of course, your people will be loyal to you. Replacing people to leave is very expensive, and it's sadly that it's unusual. The building relationships and knowing your people and having their back and all of that stuff, no matter how effective it is, it doesn't happen all that often. So when it does, you've got people who are loyal to you and stay with your organization. And finally, again, you've done the work ahead of time by taking the time to meet with them and get to know them and have them get to know you, so that when you do have to have constructive feedback conversations, performance management conversations, they're more receptive to that. You don't have to worry about them thinking that you're there out to get them or don't have their best interest when you're having those conversations. What we do as management consultants at EAP is give you some guidance when you need it. So it's important for you to remember this as supervisors. It's difficult what you're doing. Every situation is unique, and we're there at the other end of the phone for those of you who are RBH direct clients for telephonic consultation that is unlimited. You don't have to pay for it. You don't have a session limit on it, like counseling sessions, so that we can help you resolve problems as they come up, provide resources, and of course it's much less expensive to solve a problem early than to let it fester out of control. Sometimes it just helps to have someone outside the organization so we can be objective. Sometimes even just talking about it out loud can help you come to conclusions that you wouldn't have in just thinking about it alone. We can also help you with documentation. Sometimes we review what you've prepared as a draft for performance documentation, and we can work with you. If you're nervous about how to say something to the employee and you know what needs to be said, you've written it up even, but it's difficult to think how they might react, you can talk to us about that too. So it is confidential and available for you, and using it is smart as a supervisor. It's not failure on your part, it's good management, and it doesn't commit you to anything. So you don't need to take our advice. You can just simply consult and then use the information as you will. Okay, so what is the performance management process? We're going to be talking a lot about that now. It's pretty simple, 3 steps. You observe a problem, you write it down, and then you tell your employee about it so they can fix it. That's the concept. When you're making observations and writing them down, it's important to be objective. Stick with the facts versus judgments that are subjective and could be interpreted differently by others, including your employee. For example, an opinion, he needs anger management. Observation, yells at coworkers, slams doors. Opinion, he came to work drunk. Observation, slurred speech, smell of alcohol. Opinion, we hear this a lot, she has a bad attitude. Versus complains. She complains when asked to complete a task. She criticizes the employer in front of customers. Your documentation, you should be specific. Note date, time, and place, and past incidents of the same issue. As you're writing this up, again, this is for you to prepare to meet with the employee. You want to stay on task. What you're writing and the purpose, again, is so that you can address this with the employee, so the employee can fix it. The goal is not to build a case to go to court. The goal is to help your employee meet your expectations. Keep your documentation confidential, only need to know, so most likely HR, not other supervisors in an email chain. And always be fair and objective and consistent. If you're following up with one employee on an issue, you do want to make sure that everyone is meeting your standard and you're not ignoring it in someone else. To prepare for documentation, again, you want to clearly identify what the problem is. How is the employee's current behavior causing a problem in the workplace? You might notice something is wrong, or something you don't like, or something that's off, or something that's different from everybody else. But is it causing a problem? it really needs to be causing a problem for you to be addressing it. Then you need to specify what you want the employee to do differently and know that and be able to talk about that with the employee. Think about a possible course of action to correct the problem. Ideally, when you meet with the employee, you will be asking for their input and ideas on how they might resolve the problem, what course they might take, but you might have some ideas yourself and be prepared to offer those if they don't have them themselves, and talk about that, have that prepared. Absolutely consult HR when you're preparing any disciplinary action process, and us, if appropriate, and determine ahead of time what the consequence is if there's no improvement. You really need to know that before you meet with the employee so that you can, again, give them that information. Everything that you plan to do or could do, they need to be told. Finally, because you've gotten to know your folks, you might be able to anticipate how they will respond to you when you're having this difficult conversation with them. And kind of prepare for that, you know. Are they going to be accusing you of discrimination? Are they going to cry? Are they going to shut down and not respond at all? You may want to think about how you'll respond to various scenarios before you actually have the meeting. So you'll schedule a time to meet and have a conversation with your employee about the performance issues and your expectations for change. Here's some do's and don'ts. When communicating with the employee, you must keep the discussion entirely about performance-related behavior, job-related performance and behavior. You want to stick to what you've prepared, and that's the purpose of the conversation. Have your documentation to refer to, be objective and clear. Be aware, too, that you're still wearing that manager hat, no matter how well you know the employee and vice versa. So be aware of your tone and body posture when you're having this conversation. You are a voice of authority, giving some feedback that threatens their livelihood. Again, put yourself in their shoes. Finally, don't forget to communicate positive intent. You want your employee to be successful in resolving this. That's why you're having the conversation. They need to hear that. They need to hear, again, you're on their side. You want them to succeed. Here's how to meet your expectations going forward. Also, be straightforward about how serious the problem is. If you are in a disciplinary action, progressive discipline process, again, they need to know ahead of time what they can expect if the behavior does not change and how serious it is. Sometimes giving them the context that you've prepared in terms of how their behavior is a problem to the rest of the workplace can help convey the seriousness of the issue. You want to schedule your meeting in private, no interruptions, no phones. That conveys the importance. Identify the specific changes that you need, agree upon a plan, and discuss how you will follow up with them. Follow-up is very important, obviously. Specific dates to check in, specific date that the behavior should be resolved, and not to neglect that piece of it. That's also very important. It's following up and having the employee know in the initial meeting where and how that will take place. Again, the employee may be able to come up with ideas about how they can meet your expectations, or they may not in the moment. They may actually say, you know, the reason that I'm not here on time is that I've got this stress in my life with, you know, my partner's elderly parent, and we haven't been sleeping, and we need to make all these arrangements, and there's, you know, they may be dying. Don't forget to offer the EAP. Remind your folks that EAP is there as a resource to them. This would be a voluntary referral. Any personal issue that may be getting in the way of them meeting workplace expectations, or even if they're not, we're here for counseling, and don't hesitate to remind them that that is there for them. In your meeting, you don't want to try to find out what is wrong with the employee. Getting to the root cause is good for processes, but not for people. You're not a psychotherapist, and your job is to let the employee know what they're not doing well, what they need to do instead, not just figure out why they're not doing it well. You don't want to preach to the employee. You should know better than to use that kind of language in front of your students or make generalizations. Always do this, always do that. Basic communication skills that you wouldn't want your spouse to be using with you. You don't want to use that with your employee either. Don't argue. Sometimes employees' initial reaction to feedback is to argue. They want to defend themselves, and don't fall into that trap. You have your documentation with you. Stick to the facts. Don't argue or question yourself based on how the employee reacts. If you lose your temper, you're going to lose your meeting. And so be prepared. Before the meeting, also, you want to think about how you might react if the employee goes on the attack to you, verbal attack, so that you can maintain your temper and your professionalism when you're having the meeting itself. Employees, they have various levels of experience receiving critical feedback. So many may react with a lot of emotion. Just remember, if it's extreme, it's not about you. Tears, yelling, at some cases you may need to let the employees have a break or even reschedule the meeting for the next day, but don't fall into the trap of thinking, oh my goodness, this was a mistake to have this conversation based on their reaction. In your follow-up, you want to make sure that the conversation with the employee is in your documentation, what you talked about, how the employee responded, what you agreed upon is the plan, what the follow-up consists of, when you're going to meet again to check the progress, when you're going to meet again to evaluate, make sure that the problem has been resolved. So you will also be documenting what you see that's good and bad, and have those meetings no matter what. I mean, the problem might be resolved far before the end date that you expected, but that's okay. Continue to meet and reinforce that good behavior in the remaining time you have. Is everybody still with me? Here's Finbar again. He's so cute. Hello, honey. This is a park near where I grew up. Okay, let's move on. Potholes to avoid. So here's some things to avoid when you're thinking about the performance management process and the process of management in general. The biggest thing, of course, is not prioritizing investing in your relationships, not taking the time to have those one-on-ones, thinking it's not important, it's not a priority. Other things are more important, not that it's not important, but other things are more important. For those of you who are managers of other supervisors, what you can do to help is make sure that having one-on-ones is a job expectation of your supervisor team, that they're evaluated on how well they retain folks, and how how they do the process that we've been talking about. It's part of their annual performance review if you do those, because if it's not, it's easily swept under the carpet for those other things that they are evaluated on. Another issue that you want to avoid, of course, is avoiding addressing the issues because it's too tough, or maybe it's not that serious, and you just wait. And if you wait too long, it can escalate to the point of crisis, which makes it, of course, a lot harder to address. Another mistake I see is documentation that's so meticulous and detailed, but the supervisor has not had the conversation with the employee. So they're building a case, essentially, wanting to be fully prepared, and yet the point, again, of doing this process is to let the employee know what they need to do differently so they can improve, and that you want them to improve. If you're documenting a lot of detail without having had that conversation, there's no point to that. Making assumptions about the reasons for poor performance, you don't want to do that. Sometimes the employees will tell you, you can ask them if there's anything getting in the way of them meeting this expectation. But just because you know through the grapevine that they're going through a divorce, don't assume that's why. So after that's all resolved, the performance issue will take care of itself, or what have you. You want to be able to focus on what needs to change versus, again, try to get to the root cause of it. And finally, watch yourself. Don't take employees' reactions personally. I had a great lesson when I was a new supervisor from one of my staff, giving him his annual performance review. And there was a task that he was responsible for that I didn't like his style of doing it. I thought it was ineffective for the customers, and I gave him that feedback. And I don't believe I've talked about it before with him. It wasn't that big of a deal, but it was an organization that had areas for growth as part of the review process, so that's what I chose. And he disagreed with me, but he was very professional. He said, you know what, I don't see it that way. I don't think I do that. I don't think it has that effect, but, in this job, you're the boss. What you say counts. They'll change it. But it doesn't mean it's true. Wow, that's so true. Yes. Everything you do, all the judgments that you make about an employee's performance, it's your opinion, truly, and sometimes it's subjective, and you need to be aware it can be, some of it can be opinion, and it's not global. It's specific to the job and their responsibility to meet your expectations, because for the organization at that point in time, you're their manager, and that's your job. As you continue to follow up with your employee, report on what you see. Again, you have your documentation with you, and give lots of kudos when you see improvement. If performance doesn't improve, then again, you want to have a follow-up meeting and talk about that. Check in with the employee. Maybe they misunderstood something. Maybe they believe they've improved, and they haven't, in your opinion. Again, your opinion is the one that counts. And then, if it's part of a disciplinary action process that you've talked about, remind them of that, and also consider a management referral to EAP. So our last poll is, who in the audience uses management referrals? We use them at least once a month, a few times each year. We tried it once, never again. Or what's a management referral?
Okay, so most people have responded. About a quarter said they use them a couple of times a year, and actually, the overwhelming majority would like to know what's the management.
Okay, all right, very good. Okay, so the majority wants to know what that is. That's great. I will tell you. The management referrals, it's a supplement to an ongoing performance management process, and it's often used with last chance agreements for employers that do drug testing and have policy on that. If there's a positive drug test, they have a procedure where the employee needs to get an assessment and follow any treatment recommendations, and the assessment and monitoring of that treatment is through us. To use the management referral process as a supervisor or manager, you always want to start by consulting your HR to make sure that that's appropriate within your organization, because it is part of a disciplinary action. And then that supervisor or HR would call us, speak with one of the management consultants or workplace consultants, and again, do a consultation about the specifics of the concern, the point in the disciplinary action where you are and what you want to accomplish from the management referral, if it's appropriate. We have paperwork that you would complete. The employer then meets with the employee to explain why they're making the referral, what they want to have happen differently as a result, and get the employee's required signatures on the form as well as the employer's. The paperwork includes the release of information, which allows us to communicate with you as the employer and vice versa, so that the counselor that meets with the employee knows exactly what your concern is, why they're being referred, what your expectations are, and also we can get back to you about whether or not they're attending and following through. The goal of management referrals is to offer the employee assistance in meeting workplace expectations. It doesn't make sense to use that in absence of workplace expectations. So if you have an employee that you're concerned about, again, maybe isn't performing the way they used to, you know they're having a personal issue in their life, that would be a voluntary referral. Because if it's not at the level that you're thinking that you need to have a conversation with them that we've been talking about, the performance management process, it's not at the level that you want to use a management referral. It's part of the process. It does not replace those conversations by the supervisor. Finally, sometimes we call these informal referrals. Again, you're always wearing your manager hat, so even if you just remind the employee, you know, EAP is there for you. If the employee discloses that they're having an issue at home, they may interpret that when they call us as, my manager referred me, and in reality, it's voluntary. So you want to make sure when you're giving out EAP, it's up to you whether or not you use it. It's confidential, and not engage in conversations about the personal issue with the employee. Your job is to manage performance, not act as a counselor, because that can prevent the employee from getting the help that they need. So at this point, we have about 15 minutes left if anyone has any questions.
Yeah, there were a couple that came through. So one person was wondering, they mentioned that it might be good to have like an option for, you know, meetings every 6 months or meetings every year versus just, you know, quarterly being the highest number.
Mm-hmm.
In your opinion, what would be kind of the benefit of doing them more frequently, and how would that look differently from doing them just once every year or so?
Yeah. So the one-on-ones, it's different than, say, every 6 months or an annual meeting process. That has a specific agenda around performance, around evaluation, and one-on-ones that are weekly or monthly, quarterly is even pushing it, but it's not for a purpose. It's other than to build that relationship, to get to know your employee, again, you know, what they like, what their strengths are, what their goals are, for them to get to know you, and for them to know that's dedicated time. Every month, the first Monday of every month at 10 o'clock, my manager is going to call me and have an hour, and that is sacred time. That is not, you know, that's always there. It really conveys value. And so that's why I didn't give an option of more than once a quarter on that poll.
How would you address follow-up for a not to occur again type of infraction of an employee?
Say again? How would I address?
So how would you address follow-up for a not to occur again type of infraction? Okay,
so the issue is a one-time violation that if they do it again, they're fired, basically, is it? Probably
that's
sounds like it to
yeah.
me, yeah. Okay, that's right. You're not asking the question, are you, Joseph? You're reading the question.
No
okay.
way.
All right,
no way.
okay. Let's see. So Again, just you have to figure out what you intend to do and what that consequence is, and if that is the case, it happened once, whatever it is, but it's serious enough that, if they do it again, they're fired. Just let them know that, so that, they're prepared, and, hopefully it's a situation where you can take the chance that, depending on what it is, that if they do that again, it doesn't cause more damage to your organization. It's hard to know without knowing what it is, but it's not something that they can gradually improve upon. It's a one and done type of thing. So just make sure that they know. Yeah.
Someone else would like to know where they can get business cards or contact information for EAP.
Okay.
Brenda, would you
I
like to
can actually send that material.
Okay.
We just updated our wallet card summaries and posters for EAP for 2016. I'd be happy to send you any and all of those things.
Great.
Yeah.
Okay.
And if you want to get a hold of Brenda to request those, you can just call the main line we have for Reliant, and then someone in the call center, could be me, could actually get you right over to her, and she can get you those materials. One person would like to know how they can avoid that tendency to become the counselor for their employee, and how they can make that separation easier and more distinct.
Yeah. It's tough, especially if you do have more of a outside the workplace relationship to start with the employee. Some cultures, it's very family oriented, and people know each other and socialize outside of work. Sometimes there's children of employees that are now in the organization, and you have a lot of history knowledge, and you care. You care about these people. And you didn't have to start building a relationship in your job before you did that. So when you hear that they have an addiction or they have something that they're going through personally, it is tough to maintain that boundary. But I think, what I would suggest is just to remind yourself of the consequence if you don't maintain the boundary. A couple things. One, if they're able to talk to you about this, then they may not talk to one of us. They may not get the counseling support that they need if they feel that they can talk to you about it. And you're not a counselor. You can tell them that. I'm your supervisor. This is beyond my expertise. I want to make sure that you have a chance to talk to somebody who can really help you with this. And the other is you can, opening yourself up to liability. If you know too much about a clinical issue that your employee is going through, you don't want to go there, in a lot of cases. And keeping that boundary helps you get too much information about medical or clinical issues that you just want to not have. One of the advantages of using us, if there is, a need to refer an employee that you have concerns about clinically, but it's not a performance process, is that, you can know that we'll take care of that. We do an assessment with every employee that we see, and we'll be able to give them referrals and guidance if they do need to be referred to outside treatment. And you don't have to know about it. You don't have to be the conduit and get those details and have that information.
A few people have asked if we will have this presentation for download later, and we are planning to put up the recording for this on our YouTube page probably the next day or so. And you can find that by going to our website, myrbh.com. There'll actually be a link to our YouTube page there. I have a few more questions. Let me see if we can get through a few more of these. Does EAP have any team building services, rather than, kind of focusing on just one individual, kind of ongoing interpersonal conflict maybe that might be there?
So it sounds like maybe it's about a couple of employees that are not getting along with each other, perhaps. In terms of interpersonal conflict, we do have a number of trainings that we provide which include, there's some team building topics in our training library. But those, generally speaking, are designed to provide a general training for a group versus be used if there's a problem that one of the employees needs to be, you need to be having a performance conversation about. If you do have a training and it's really focused on a topic that's designed to be heard by one or two people in the room, chances are, unless you're explicit with them about this, they won't get it. They won't think it applies to them, and everyone else in the room will know that it does and maybe resent having to be in the room. So if you do have a couple of folks that aren't getting along, again, you can consult with us. Give us a call. We can go into the details of what's going on and give you some guidance about what course to take.
We have one person with kind of a question about individual performance of a specific member of their team, and it's kind of long, so rather than paraphrasing it, maybe we could suggest they give us a call.
Yeah,
we can
absolutely.
Take it from there. I'd hate to
Yeah.
cram a long response into a
Right.
30-second bit.
Right.
So,
yeah.
And I will try to give you their email if you want to reach out to them directly.
Okay.
Marcy.
Sure.
I think that's all the questions we have at this point. So.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much. Go out there and meet with your people.